The nanny who broke the mold. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the Whitmore mansion, followed by screams that seemed to come straight from hell. Keisha Williams stepped through the golden gate of the $50 million estate and found 3 6-year-old boys turning the living room into a battlefield. Red paint dripped down the white walls like blood. Crystal furniture, lame pieces on the Italian marble floor, and silk pillow feathers floated through the air like dirty snow. But what shocked Keisha the most wasn't the destruction. It was the pure hatred in those children's eyes. Another black nanny, yelled Tyler, the leader of the triplets, throwing a toy truck directly at her feet. Daddy said you're cheaper. Keisha, 32 years old, had never imagined her career as a preschool teacher would lead her here. With a degree in education from Howard University and a specialization in childhood trauma, she had spent a decade working in community centers, helping at-risk children, but nothing had prepared her to face 3 privileged boys who had turned terrorizing nannies into a sadistic sport. You won't last an hour, sneered Dylan, throwing paint on the wall behind her. The last one ran out crying after 15 minutes. The third triplet, Mason, remained silent, watching Keisha with calculating eyes, as if assessing the best way to break another adult. Margaret Whitmore, the billionaire mother, appeared at the door, her usual expression of superiority frozen on her face. Miss Williams, as you can see, my children are energetic. 17 nannies have quit in 6 months. The last one was a Harvard graduate and left in tears. Keisha nodded calmly, watching the chaos. I understand completely, Mrs. Whitmore. I hope you're tougher than the others, Margaret continued, adjusting her $200,000 pearl necklace. After all, for what we're paying. She left the sentence hanging with a condescending smile. What Margaret didn't know was that Keisha had grown up on the south side of Chicago, where children traumatized by urban violence express their pain through aggression far more intense than any rich kid's tantrum. She recognized the signs immediately. These boys weren't demons, they were wounded children desperately testing boundaries. While Tyler threw more toys and Dylan continued his destructive art, Keisha did something none of the previous 17 nannies had done. She knelt down in the middle of the chaos and began building a fort with the scattered wooden blocks. What are you doing? Mason asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Building a fort, Keisha replied calmly, stacking the blocks with precision. Every war needs a strategic headquarters. The 3 boys stopped their destruction for a moment, intrigued by the unexpected response. Margaret watched from the doorway with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. How dare this woman ignore the destruction and play on the floor as if it were normal? Just then, Richard Whitmore stormed into the room. At 45, the real estate mogul was known for his impatience and explosive temper. Margaret, what the hell is going on here? His eyes landed on Keisha. And who is this? The new nanny, Margaret replied with an exaggerated sigh. Miss Williams, this is my husband, Richard Whitmore. Richard sized Keisha up with the same look he used to appraise properties. How much are we paying for her? He asked, using the word her as if Keisha were a commodity. $3,000 a week, Margaret replied. I thought that would be enough for someone with that profile. Richard laughed dismissively. $3,000. Margaret, you're being too generous. I bet she's never seen that much money in her life. Keisha stood up, walked over to a broken bookcase, and carefully picked up a book. The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain, she said, her calm voice cutting through the tense air. Interesting story about 2 boys who switch places and discover that true nobility has nothing to do with money or birth. She looked at the Whitmores. My grandmother always said that the difference between rich people and decent people is that rich people buy books to decorate their shelves, but decent people read them to decorate their souls. The silence in the room was palpable. The triplets had completely stopped, fascinated by this woman who was not intimidated by their parents. I grew up reading that book in public libraries. Keisha continued, returning to her fort. I imagine none of the 17 nannies who ran out asked why 3 intelligent, healthy children feel the need to destroy everything around them. Richard stepped forward, clearly annoyed. Listen here, Miss Williams. We don't need analysis. We need discipline. Keisha smiled softly. Howard University. Actually, education with a specialization in childhood trauma. But you're right about one thing. Discipline is important. The question is, what kind teaches a child to respect? Or what kind teaches a child to fear? The comment hit Richard like a slap. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone he considered inferior. You have a very sharp tongue for someone in your position, he said, his voice low and threatening. That's when Mason, the quietest triplet, surprised everyone. He approached the fort. How did you know you needed a bigger base for taller towers? He asked. Keisha knelt down. I learned that from my little brother. He loved to build things, but they always fell down until we learned that solid foundations are more important than pretty walls. Where's your brother now? Mason asked. Keisha's face softened with sadness. He died when I was 15. A stray bullet in a neighborhood shootout. The room fell silent. Tyler and Dylan moved closer. Drawn by the raw honesty, Richard cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Well, that's very touching, but it doesn't change anything. My children still need to learn how to behave. I completely agree, said Keisha. Proper behavior starts with adults, showing mutual respect. Children are just mirrors of what they see. The truth of those words hit everyone. The triplets looked down, remembering every babysitter who had promised to stay and then run away. Richard, sensing he was losing control, decided to resort to intimidation. Miss Williams, you work for us. If you can't handle my children the way we want them handled, you can pack up your things and leave right now. Keisha stared him down, her eyes flashing with a determination that made Richard instinctively back down. It was the same look she had held for years while facing racist police officers and prejudiced teachers. Mr. Whitmore, you're absolutely right. You can fire me at any time, but as long as I'm here, I'm going to treat your children like human beings, not problems to be solved. She turned to the boys. How about we finish our fort, boys? I have some ideas about drawbridges that might work better than throwing toys to keep enemies out. For the first time in months, the triplets smiled genuinely. Over the next few days, Keisha completely transformed the house's routine. The triplets, who had previously spent their mornings destroying furniture, now woke up early to help her in the kitchen. She implemented special missions that channeled their destructive energy into constructive projects. Today, we're going to build a bridge that can hold all the toy cars without collapsing, she announced. Tyler, you can use the toothpicks to make the main towers, and you, Dylan, can calculate how many marshmallows we need for the joints. Margaret watched from the kitchen door with growing irritation. Richard, she whispered to her husband, we need to talk about this nanny. She's changing their behavior too much. They're becoming different. Different how? Richard asked. Yesterday, Tyler asked me how many people work at our company. Dylan wanted to know why our house is so big. And Margaret paused, uncomfortable. Mason asked me if I missed his grandmother. The mention of Richard's mother, who had died the previous year, caused both of them to fall silent. The boys had never shown an interest in deep family matters before. She's putting ideas in their heads, Margaret continued. Ideas about equality, about questioning our position. Just then, Rosa Martinez, the Filipina housekeeper who had worked for the family for 15 years, entered with coffee. Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore. Miss Keisha asked me to ask if the boys could plant an herb garden. She said it would be educational for them to learn about responsibility. Margaret rolled her eyes. She probably thinks we're a family of farmers. If I may say so, Rosa said softly. The boys have been calmer and happier since Miss Keisha arrived. Yesterday, Tyler thanked me for making his favorite snack. That was the first time in 2 years any of them had shown gratitude. That night, after another violent argument between Richard and Margaret, Keisha made a phone call. Jazz, I need some professional advice. She whispered to her best friend, Dr. Jasmine Parker, a social worker specializing in child protection. I'm working for a wealthy family, and there are clear signs of emotional abuse. The children are reproducing patterns of violence they've learned from their parents. Keisha, you know you need to document everything, Jasmine said. Wealthy families have the resources to cover up any allegations. You need very solid evidence. Over the next few days, Keisha meticulously documented every incident, every prejudiced comment, every sign of emotional instability. During a quiet moment, Rosa approached her. You're doing something none of the other nannies have done, Rosa said. You're really caring about these children. I've worked here for 15 years. I've seen a lot of things. If you ever need confirmation about certain situations, know that you're not the only one who's witnessed them. Rosa's alliance was the final piece of the puzzle. Keisha knew that with Rosa's 15 years of silent observation, she had the crucial witness she needed. The perfect storm began on a Monday morning when Keisha implemented the first phase of her plan. As Richard and Margaret ate breakfast, an unmarked van from the Department of Social Services pulled up. Dr. Jasmine Parker presented her ID, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. We have received detailed reports of possible emotional neglect and exposure of minors to psychologically harmful environments. Margaret nearly choked. Reports? What kind of reports? Extensive documentation of systematic destructive behavior by the children, regular exposure to violent domestic conflict, and evidence that the guardians normalize racial discrimination and verbal abuse in the presence of the minors, Jasmine said calmly. Richard stood up, his face red with indignation. This is absurd. Who would dare make false accusations against our family? The evidence includes audio recordings, detailed reports with specific dates, and witnesses, Jasmine continued. It was then that Margaret connected the dots. It was her, wasn't it? The nanny. That woman was spying on us. Keisha appeared at the kitchen door with the triplets, who now looked like completely different children, calm and smiling. Good morning, Dr. Parker. As we agreed, the boys are ready for their individual interviews. You planned this, Richard shouted. I came into your home to care for 3 traumatized children, Keisha replied with unruffled dignity. What I found was a systematic pattern of behavior that any child protection professional would be obligated to report. Rosa, who had just entered, placed a tray of coffee down. Dr. Parker, she said in a clear voice, I have worked in this house for 15 years. If you need a witness, I can confirm every incident described in the report. Rosa's betrayal was the final blow. Richard frantically pulled out his phone. I'm calling my lawyers. This is harassment, Mr. Whitmore, Jasmine said calmly. Any attempt at intimidation or obstruction will be included in the official report. The scandal leaked to the local media within 24 hours. The same society that once revered the Whitmores now watched them with scrutiny. Clients cancelled contracts, and the country club revoked their membership. Margaret was quietly removed from all her charitable positions. 2 years later, Keisha Williams stood on the main stage of the National Child Protection Conference, receiving the Professional of the Year award. Her non-profit organization had helped more than 300 children in situations similar to the Whitmore triplets. True child protection, she said into the microphone, begins when we stop blaming children for reflecting the toxic environments we create for them. Richard, watching on the television in his empty apartment, finally understood. Keisha hadn't just protected his children, she had exposed truths that all his arrogance couldn't hide. She was a skilled professional with the courage to take on people far more powerful than herself. While the Whitmores learned humility through loss, Keisha built a legacy based on protection, dignity, and the proof that underestimating someone due to prejudice is the most costly mistake one can make.